everybody. It's Ed Martin, president of the Phyllis Schlafly Eagles. Great to be with you. Well, we have a chance to get together again. Episode 4 of the series on FX called Mrs. America launched, and we do a review of it and a fact check. As usual, Hollywood is trying to spin us away from the truth and tell us lies, and we'll have to break it down. I hope you'll visit realmrsamerica.com, and see the real truth about Phyllis. We've had a lot of folks who come there and they say they get drawn into hearing Phyllis in her own words. I hope you'll do that too, because even as we fact check this and tell you the truth about it, it's better in Phyllis's words, trust me. In this episode of Miss America, it seems like they're trying to make it seem that the feminists are very sweet, the libbers are very kind, and they're do-gooders, and somehow Phyllis Schlafly's mean and even brings up some violence, or violence is brought up and they seem to want to blame Phyllis. It's not true. Let's break it down. You know, this episode is a wonderful historical episode. We're really excited they did this, episode 4 we're talking about, because it does depict this historic and famous debate between Betty Friedan and Phyllis Schlafly. And the fact is, it was at Illinois State University in early 1973. It was an extraordinary debate. It was important. But, you know, the fact check on this is that they seem to imply that it's Phyllis Schlafly's first debate. She had dozens of debates. In fact, Jill Ruckelshaus, who's depicted in this series, Phyllis and her famously debated before this. So that's just not true. Another detail is Fred Schlafly wasn't at the debate. They depict him as being there, although I'm sure he was supportive and all. Actually, Phyllis's daughter, Liza, was there, and that's the factual truth. I guess that doesn't matter. They want this false narrative around Fred Schlafly. And by the way, they do a really good job in this series, in this episode, of trying to make Betty Friedan seem sympathetic. I mean, we're supposed to feel sympathy for her. She was a tough organizer, a tough woman. They're working really hard at this. It's kind of funny to me. Let's take a look at some of the inside facts of this episode.
The ERA will not solve your personal problems. It will not hand you a happy home life. It won't give you a Sunday kind of love, as the popular song goes, and it certainly will not keep your husband from being jealous or petty or dumping you in your middle age for a new, younger model after you have devoted yourself to keeping his home for 20 or 30 years. Because you simply cannot legislate universal sympathy for the middle-aged woman. Now remember this. Before you throw away your youth and your beauty and your virtue to join in this new sisterhood of misery.
You are a traitor to your sex. You're an Tom.
Now, you are correct on one count. I do leave my home on occasion, and I travel all over the country, and I meet women from all walks of life. And you, Miss Friedan, are the unhappiest woman I have ever met.
And you are a witch! God, I'd like to burn you at the stake!
Well, that's a famous scene now, iconic scene that was never captured on tape. There is no tape of that event, that exchange with Phyllis Schlafly and Betty Friedan at this debate, the debate that took place. And of course, Betty Friedan says she wants to violently kill Phyllis Schlafly. And somehow the scene is supposed to still make Phyllis look like the mean one. And that's what Hollywood does. It takes the truth, in fact, and spins it right around, turns it all the way around. You know, Hollywood wants to make Betty Friedan's quote seem like it was her quote in anger and hurt and an outburst, but there's two basic problems with that. One is, in her long career, Phyllis Schlafly never made personal attacks. There's no public record of that. There's on all the many transcripts and audio and videotapes. There's none of that. In fact, liberal writers have come down to do pieces on Phyllis, down from Chicago, out from New York, and they try to dig through and find these kinds of personal attacks. It just didn't happen. The other one is that Betty Friedan's threat, it was a calculated maneuver. You have to know Betty Friedan, what they were up to, and realize there's a lot to unpack here. Let's dig in a little deeper. You know, when I said Phyllis Schlafly didn't make personal attacks, that's not me saying it, although for my many years of knowing her, I never saw it. In fact, I often tell people there was a time where we were frustrated with a major Republican leader who wasn't living up to his word. And I was angry. And I was saying, he was this, he is that, saying names. And Phyllis stopped me and said, we never attack people. We attack their conduct, we make contrast, and we win the argument and keep going. And if we don't win the argument, we come back again and argue again. It's just not a real criticism, a real thing to depict Phyllis making personal attacks. And the record doesn't bear it out. You know, Mrs. America says that Phyllis talked about Betty Friedan's divorce, and she announced to the audience that they shouldn't throw away, quote, their youth, beauty, and virtue. That's the phrase they use. And they say that like that's what sent Betty Friedan over the edge and threw the burn you at the stake line out there. But in reality, the quote that Phyllis said, which was quoted at the time in the Illinois State University school newspaper, it was this: wife and mother can be a woman's number one fulfilling career, and she can enter the workforce if she chooses to. That doesn't seem like something that would make it so you burn at the stake. And there was no indication, and Phyllis wouldn't have talked about someone's divorce and all that kind of stuff. That's just Hollywood trying to depict Phyllis in a bad light. Also, you know, they try to make it seem like Betty Friedan's comment was an outburst. If you know anything about politics, at that level, Betty Friedan was a very significant figure by that time in 1973. She had a major New York Times best-selling book. She was lionized, spoke all over the country. She was very calculating, very shrewd. Phyllis said this about that, was asked about the comment. And Phyllis said, why did Betty Friedan say it? It wasn't said in passion or anger. She was as cool as a cucumber when she said it. And most probably, it was a calculated thrust to get me to blow my cool. Now think about that. In this episode of Mrs. America, they try to depict Phyllis being coached that the way to have someone lose their cool is to attack them personally. It turns out Betty Friedan was doing that to her in real life, and they're turning it out their head. That's what Hollywood does. They don't tell you how they're lying. They lie about it in a way that makes you think the truth is, in this case, Phyllis was the one being mean. By the way, I'm going to say it again for you. I wrote it in looking at this quote. Phyllis was right about this. Betty Friedan was no amateur. At the time, you have to understand, now when they depict this, we know Phyllis is famous. Betty Friedan, she knew exactly what she was doing. By the way, Phyllis Schlafly wasn't an amateur either. You know, her famous quote, which I love to say to people, she said, I've dealt with 6 children, and I certainly wasn't going to lose my composure over some epithets or insults hurled by a grown woman. You know, that's pretty good. If you know children and you know 6 children, that's pretty good. Now, the other one detail is key. Phyllis was not dumbstruck by this comment by Betty Friedan. Phyllis knew that you're having a debate, you keep moving things forward. So when she saw this attack from Betty Friedan, what did she do? She and this is her quote. The quote was this, was the ERA proponents have almost given up arguing for affirmative consequences that the amendment would have. They've resorted to abusing their opponents. In other words, Phyllis said, if you're going to make attacks, I'm going to turn it on you like that. By the way, Phyllis was not talking about Betty Friedan when she said that. She was talking about all these feminist leaders that were really lashing out, and this accelerated through the fight. As the feminists started losing, they started attacking. Flo Kennedy, who's depicted as a great feminist leader in the Mrs. American series, publicly said this, quote, I just don't see why some people don't hit Phyllis Schlafly in the mouth. We're arguing with people who obviously aren't speaking from a rational perspective. Instead of so much argument, people should slap. Antifa might have fit right into this gang. Instead of arguing, if you're rational, they're going to hit you in the head. That's what she said. Feminist Harlan Ellison said this about Phyllis Schlafly. If Phyllis Schlafly walked into the headlights of my car, I would knock her into the next time zone. So who are the people being violent here? It's the fact is, if you go back and look at the history, not the Hollywood, but the history, Phyllis was right. The feminists threaten violence rather than talk about the issues. They attack rather than argue. And that's the common thing. They try to make these feminists into heroes because they're against Phyllis, and they try to make Phyllis the villain. The fact is, Phyllis Schlafly and her band of housewives and conservatives were under constant threat. They were constantly being harassed People were threatening the feminists and all. And the fact is, they kept going forward. And if you want to learn more about how these women and Phyllis Schlafly were heroic, please visit realmrsamerica.com, find out more, and stay tuned. We've got episode after episode left for a number of weeks, and we'll keep fact checking and we'll keep getting you to the real Mrs. America. Thanks for looking into this. Pass it on to your friends. Make sure to stay in touch. Talk to you soon.